Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise to also laud a really significant achievement which we're going to finalize tonight with the final passage of the Frank R. Lautenberg Chemical Safety for the 21st Century Act. This much-needed bill will provide updates that have been due literally for decades to the Toxic Substances Control Act of 1976, known as TSCA for short, which has been outdated and overdue for updating since almost that time. Now, getting to where we are tonight, about to pass this by an overwhelming vote, following the 403-12 vote in the House a few weeks ago, didn't happen overnight. In fact, it took about 5+ years. In 2011, that's when I started discussions with a broad array of folks, certainly including Senator Lautenberg. And that's when I first sat down with Frank and started this process in a meaningful way. And when we agreed that we would try to bridge the significant differences between our two viewpoints and come up with a strong bipartisan bill. That same year, I also sat down with John Shimkus of Illinois to let him know that Frank and I were going to put in a lot of effort to come up with this framework, and we wanted him to be a full and equal and contributing partner. Over the next year and a half, we slogged through that process of trying to come up with a strong bipartisan bill. It wasn't easy. Between Senator Lautenberg and myself and our staffs, other staffs, there was an often brutal stretch of difficult negotiations, challenging times, testing everybody's patience. Several times we walked away to come back together again. And finally, it did come together. In early 2013, that really started taking shape. Toward the end of April 2013, we were far enough along to lock a small group of staff and experts in a room to finalize that first bipartisan bill. Folks like Brian Zumwalt, my chief counsel then, Dmitry Karakitsos, who is my counsel, is now a key staffer, continues on the EPW committee, Senator Lautenberg's chief counsel, Ben Dunham, his chemical advisor, Brendan Bell. And that led finally to this first bipartisan bill, which we introduced on May 23rd, 2013. Now, that wasn't the end of our TSCA journey, and unfortunately, in many ways, the most difficult segment of that journey was soon after that introduction on May 23rd, because on June 3rd, just a few weeks later, Frank passed. The single greatest champion of reforming how chemicals are regulated died at 89 years of age. That was heartbreaking, but it was a moment when all of us who had been involved only redoubled our commitment to following this through to the end. Soon after Frank's unfortunate passing, our colleague Tom Udall really stepped up to the plate in a major way to take Frank's role as the Democratic lead in this effort. We had a quiet dinner one night here on Capitol Hill to talk about our commitment to carry on this fight and get it done. And we formed a partnership, a friendship that was really built around this work with an absolute commitment to get that done. And I'll always be so thankful to Tom and his partnership, also his great staff, including their senior policy advisor, Jonathan Black. As with most major undertakings, we had a lot of other help all along the way. Early on at that stage of the process, Senators Crapo and Alexander were extremely helpful. Also, a little later on, Senators Booker and Merkley and Markey, they did a lot to advance the ball and refine the product. Of course, at every step of the way, I continued to meet and talk with Congressman John Shimkus. He was a persistent and a reliable partner in this process. as was his senior policy advisor, Chris Sarley. Throughout this process, staff was absolutely essential and monumental. They did yeoman's work in very, very difficult and trying circumstances. I mentioned Brian Zumwalt, my former chief counsel. He was a driving force behind this, and I deeply appreciate and acknowledge his work, as well as someone else I mentioned, Dmitry Karakitsov, who continues to work as a key staffer on the committee and who's seeing this over the goal line. Let me also thank Ben Dunham, former chief counsel to Senator Lautenberg. I think in the beginning, particularly, Ben and Brian and Dmitry gave each other plenty of hell, but worked through very difficult negotiations to get it done. And also I want to thank Jonathan Black and Drew Wallace in Senator Udall's office, Michal Friedhoff and Adrian Deviney with Senator Markey, and on the outside, a lot of expert help from all sorts of stakeholders across the political spectrum, certainly including industry representatives with the American Chemistry Council. And I want to thank Mike Walls, Del Perelman, Rudy Underwood, Amy Duvall, Robert Flagg, and of course, their leader, Cal Dooley. Finally, there's one enormous figure who is owed a great debt of gratitude and a lot of credit for seeing this over the goal line tonight, and that's Frank's better half, and I say that with deep respect and admiration to Frank, but surely his better half, Bonnie Lautenberg. She's been called the 101st Senator, particularly on this issue. She was devoted to seeing Frank's work completed, and I thank her for her relentless effort reaching out to members, House and Senate, stakeholders to make sure this happened. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is long overdue. All stakeholders across the political spectrum agreed for decades that this aspect of the law needed to be updated. We needed to fully protect public health and safety, which we all want to do. We also needed to ensure that American companies, which are world leaders today in science, research, and innovation, remain so and do not get put behind by a regulatory system which is overly burdensome and unworkable. This TSCA reform bill, properly named after Frank Lautenberg, achieves those goals. It is a positive, workable compromise in the best sense of that term, so that we will achieve public health and safety and ensure that our leading American companies, great scientists, great innovators, great world leaders in this sector remain just that and remain the world leaders we want and need them to continue to be. So I thank all those who have contributed to this long but ultimately successful and worthwhile effort. With that, Mr. President, I look forward to our vote and I yield the floor.